We're going to turn now to developing news. WNBA star Brittney Griner has been released from a Russian prison after a one-for-one prisoner swap. Griner was held for months in a Russian prison on drug charges after she pled guilty to charges stemming from the discovery of cannabis oil cartridges in her luggage. Earlier today, the White House tweeted that Griner was, quote, safe and on a plane after announcing her release. I want to bring in my expert panel now to discuss this development. Let's bring in Mike Korbanix and also Duncan Levin to join me to talk about the swap. Mike is not with us yet, but I have Duncan. Duncan, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Good to be with you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So this is breaking news, big news. And we had rumblings that there may be this sort of state-for-state, prisoner-for-prisoner swap in the workings, but it was sort of, behind closed doors. And now we have the news that Brittney Griner is coming home to the United States. What's your initial reaction about the swap, and why do you think it took so long?
Well, this is something that's been in the works, obviously, for a long time. It took a long time because there are a lot of competing interests at heart. And what you're talking about is basically this equivocation between a prisoner in Russia and a prisoner in the United States. The fact is that Russia is a absolutely sham justice system, and there are cases going forward every day in Russia that lack any merit whatsoever. And so in a way, you're comparing apples to oranges here between Brittney Griner on the one hand, who basically committed something that at most would be a slap on the wrist and getting sent off to a penal colony for an extremely stiff sentence, versus Viktor Bout, who was convicted of a very serious offense of potentially selling weapons to guerrillas. And so it's this equivocation between a system where there is due process here in the United States, and for all of the problems with the U.S. justice system, there's some fundamental fairness at play here in the United States versus Russia. I represented Bill Browder, who is Sergei Magnitsky's lawyer. I've represented Oleg Deripaska. I've been dealing with the Russian justice system for a long time, and I can tell you there is no justice system there. These charges are bogus and trumped up. And so I think, to answer your question, what is at play here is whether we want to encourage Russia to take more people in the future on bogus charges to try to get other people here in the United States released, to try to basically increase their bargaining position. And that is a diplomatic dance. There's the Department of Justice that's involved. And frankly, they did this all pretty quickly, considering all of the different players here.
Yeah, Duncan, no, great points. Now, if you look at it, the charge that she was brought on, and you touched on this point, if that was a charge, if she was charged with that, let's say years ago when marijuana was still illegal, if she was brought on charges, it would still be a slap on the wrist in many ways. And if she had no criminal record, as you know, here in New York, we have something called an ACD, right? An adjournment and contemplation dismissal. At most, she would have that, and then the charge would be dismissed after a certain amount of time if she, stayed out of trouble. But she got 10 years. 10 years in Russia. And you mentioned the due process or lack thereof. Do you think that the consideration of the differences in the justice system was something that the White House took into consideration when deciding that this swap was going to be something they needed to do to sort of right the injustice against Brittney Griner in Russia?
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at the two prisoners that are in the news now being held in Russia, Paul Whelan and Brittney Griner, and it's not a huge surprise that they released Brittney Griner, which is in a way an easier case to show the injustice in, because Paul Whelan also is trumped up, and it is not a real charge, and it's just a little bit more complicated. And I think that President Biden is very committed to freeing Paul Whelan too. The fact is that there are so many political persecutions in Russia that are not based on anything we would think to be justice. And so, look, Russia is involved in war crimes right now. This is a country that is just indiscriminately shelling citizens. To think that they have any justice in these courtrooms where there's a 99% conviction rate and where nobody has any due process whatsoever, and where Brittney Griner was given documents to read that she had to read herself using Google Translate with no lawyer in the room. The sentence is ridiculous. The charges are ridiculous. There is no justice here. That's why the United States stepped in. And as for Viktor Bout, the fact is that Judge Shinlin, who's the U.S. District Judge who sentenced him a long time ago, said at the time that the sentence was too large and that she was only sentencing him to 25 years because that was the mandatory sentence that she was required to impose. She had no choice. And she said on the record now, because people have been talking about Viktor Bout, that 11 years is more than enough for him. He never sold weapons to anybody. No one ever got hurt. And that 11 years is more than sufficient. And so I think on both sides, there were a compelling rationale for this trade. It would have been better had it included Paul Whelan also, but as for a one-for-one trade, it's a good outcome for everybody. It ensures that justice is done on both sides. Both sides are winning. But I would caution not to make this false equivocation between two criminal defendants, because one of them is a criminal defendant, Viktor Bout, who committed crimes, had due process in the United States, and was sentenced to an excessive sentence. But the case of Brittney Griner is one of absolute, complete injustice.
No, absolutely. And, a lot of pressure on the White House to bring Brittney Griner home from the public and those and her family members, of course. And this is now happening. It's breaking news. And I can tell you this, that it's also in the context and shadow of the Ukraine invasion. So this wasn't just about justice in courts, a lot of politics and international relationships involved in here.